Cold wind swept across the desolate mountaintop. A harsh storm this deep into winter was not uncommon, and as Recklin watched the cruel breath of nature wrestle the implacable force of gravity for control of the snowfall, he was very glad the elders had carved an alcove before the rest of the ancients. It was a simple affair: 2 stone slab benches by the large brazier that held the eternity flame, and some nondescript pillars. While the cold infiltrated his cloak and nipped at his feathers, the small sanctuary prevented the winds from driving into his bones. And for that, he was very thankful. As he mulled over his surroundings, the ones he had observed day in and day out for. However long, something caught his eye. Or he thought something did. He would have sworn he saw movement, not of the chaotically swirling snow, more deliberate and purposeful. Under the overcast gray and swirling white, his visibility was next to nil. But there it was again. He fixated on the point on the horizon. He watched as the faint signs of movement morphed into a figure. One that was walking, or more aptly, trudging, toward his small respite. This caused Recklin no small amount of concern. There was nothing atop this lonely mountain, save for the rest of the ancients, so there should be no lost travelers, and the only ones allowed access to the rest were the high priests, so that ruled out prying interlopers. Combined with the fact that one would have to traverse the nearly 10,000 steps of the grand ascent and a storm that would dissuade even the most devout, Recklin felt something was very wrong. As the mysterious apparition approached, it began to take a more distinguishable form. Though the finer details were not yet discernible, Recklin could observe some of its defining characteristics. It was short, being barely the height of an adolescent, bipedal, and no wings sporting from its back. He tightened the grip on his spear. He knew exactly what this was. A messenger had flown in some suns back to inform him that a group of humans would be coming planetside for an archaeological expedition nearby. He has also informed Alkin that he should be extra guarded, for while the humans had been informed of the rules regarding the rest, they were sometimes known to be underhanded and may attempt to gain access through guile, cunning, or possibly even brute force. Before departing, the messenger had warned Recklin that they were Undahar, high-grav deathworlders that could pack an inordinate amount of power into their deceptively small frame. Recklin watched for what felt like an eternity as the human marched slowly, but relentlessly towards him. He knew that if this creature had even a modicum of combat experience and had come to fight, it could give him a run for his money, despite all his training and being roughly half his size. So he steeled himself for whatever encounter that was to come. But, much to his surprise, as the human crossed the threshold out of the wind and into the shielded nook, it just stood for a moment, its shoulders relaxed, seemingly relieved to have found reprieve from the torrential winds that howled around. The human then gave itself a great shake, relieving it of the snow that had hitchhiked its way into the alcove on its clothing. 2 bulbous glass lenses, a mask pulled up over its face, and the donned hood of its outer jacket made the thing look more akin to a large insect than the simian that it apparently was. The glass of human's goggles looked Recklin up and down before it finally decided to speak. "Sheesh, you're a big fella, ain't ya?" Recklin was slightly taken aback. That was not the usual first question for most of the visitors to the rest. He glanced down at his form. "Yes, I suppose I am," he responded flatly, in truth. He had never considered his frame, and while he was of average stature among his own people, he still stood nearly twice the size of the human. The human simply doffed its hood, mask, and goggles, revealing lightly browned skin, thick jet-black hair, and a pair of piercing sable eyes. "Amir," it said as it held out one of its arms. Recklin had no reference for this greeting, so instead he offered a traditional one of his own in return. One wing folded across the breast. Offer a slight bow in return. The human Amir looked at his hand momentarily before retracting it. "Right, human thing. Got it." The human briefly looked around the alcove before his eyes settled on the 3 benches around the eternity flame. Seemingly satisfied with the amenities, he gave a brief nod to himself and wandered over to them. With no small amount of difficulty, and much to Recklin's amusement, the human managed to awkwardly shinny up onto one of the benches that obviously wasn't built with his anatomy in mind. When he was suitably seated, the human slid a large bag off his back and carefully took out 2 cylinders. One was small and green, clearly made for human hands. The second was red and much larger, and aside from being visually identical to the other, seemed to serve no discernible purpose. Recklin was ruminating on the purpose of the human having 2 identical but differently sized objects, as well as their function when Amir spoke, "Papa Squat Big Guy, I brought lunch." Recklin shifted uncomfortably. While technically this was a request from a pilgrim and therefore fell within the realm of his duty, it still felt somewhat inappropriate. Amir seemed to sense his reluctance, even without looking at him. "Don't be a party pooper. Look, I guarantee no one else is coming in, and I ain't gonna snitch. Promise." So Recklin obliged the strange request and took a rather awkward seat next to Amir. "Here," Amir said, as he held out the larger of the 2 cylinders towards Recklin, who stared at it briefly before hesitantly taking it. "It's potato leek. Originally, I was going to go with chicken noodle, but that—" Amir let out a small snort. Seemed inappropriate. Recklin did not understand the humor of the situation. He had no idea what a chicken was, nor a noodle, so whatever the human found so delightful about the wordplay was lost on him. Recklin watched as Amir raised his cylinder, blew briefly on the contents, and gave a hearty drink. So he tentatively raised his own cylinder and gave a brief inhale, noting a savory earthly fragrance, which was admittedly quite pleasant. In an instant, his mind flashed back to the messenger's warning. Guile it was then. Without a second thought, Recklin hurled the cylinder, allowing its contents to scatter across the stone floor. He sprang to his feet, no longer wishing to engage in any sort of pleasantries with this underhanded little ape. "You dare test the resolution of the Solomon's Guard?" he bellowed to the startled human. A moment of silence hung through the recess before Amir simply sighed and clambered off the much too large bench, fetching the large cylinder from its resting place across the alcove. He brought it back to the bench where he sat it upright, before awkwardly regaining his position atop the seat. "I'm sorry, I should have been more clear," he said, as he began to pour some of the contents, carefully, from his smaller cylinder into the larger. "I'm not here for the rest of the ancients. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was kind of bummed when I was informed that only high priests were granted access, but it is what it is. No, Recklin, I'm here to see you." The avian was taken aback. Being a somnolence guard had a certain level of prestige to it, to be sure, but to have someone actively seek him out, especially a being he had had no interactions with previously, was no normal behavior. Was this the human's challenge, then? He moved to ready his spear. He prepared himself for a duel. To what end? He growled at the human. Amir's brow furrowed, his lips pursed at the question. Do you not know what day it is?" Truth be told, he did not. At the beginning of his tenure, he tried to mark the passage of time, but as most of the pilgrims to the gate never addressed him, and the high priest only issued formal requests and orders, the suns quickly began to blur into one another, so he sighed and offered a weak no. Amir flashed his teeth. "Why, it's the festiving! From what I understand, it's like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and the 4th all rolled into one, a time for flock and friends, as I'm told." Recklin flinched. Was it really the festiving? How? Many had he missed standing his solitary vigil at the gate. The human's assertions were correct. It was a day for flock and friend. But Recklin's flock had all flown into the thereafter, and being of the guard wasn't exactly conducive to one's social life. When one is alone in the world, the festiving held little relevance, so why did this little primate with no connection to it, or him, seem to care so much? As if to read his thoughts, Amir continued, "I was reading up on the rest of the ancients, and by extension, the somnolence guard. You guys are riding solo all the time, and I know what it's like to be alone on the holidays, so I decided to bring the festivities to you with some company and some soup. It's good for the soul." Recklin felt the guilt well up in his chest. Here the human had arrived with food and friendship, and he had engaged in what was tantamount to a hatchling's tantrum. Sheepishly, he slid back onto the bench next to the small man. "I am sorry. About that," he said, gesturing to the now soup-laden floor. Amir just laughed in response. "Don't be, I get it. Some weirdo shows up with a thermos full of soup at an ancient holy site. I'd be hella suspicious too. I'll even add points for you not realizing that it's the festiving. Amir was practically beaming as he held out the larger cylinder, to Recklin for the second time. Instead of throwing it across the alcove like an impudent child, this time, Recklin drank deep from the contents. The earthy aromas that he previously noted gave way to an earthy flavor, one that was thick and rich, and somehow still warm. He noted that there was something objectively amateurish about the dish, too much of one spice, or perhaps not enough of another. It was not brewed by a professional, but that only seemed to add to the significance of the thing. It was crafted, specifically for this encounter. Amir watched him intently and waited until his beak was clear of the liquid foodstuffs before asking, "So what's life like in the Guard?" That simple question set in motion a long conversation that would permeate the remainder of the day. The two alien beings conversed about all manner of things, hopes and dreams to sorrows and sacrifices. Amir discussing the war that nearly extinguished his species to the humans' uplift by a reptilian race. Recklin reminiscing about his childhood and his shirking of social obligations in favor of professional ones. They talked and laughed and shared with each other until the storm broke and the red star turned the sky pink as it sank low and hugged the distant horizon. And Recklin felt complete. This was the first real conversation he had had in years. Amir took note of the dying, of the light, and clicked his teeth. "Welp, it's about time I head back. I don't want to face those steps in the dark." Recklin huffed in affirmation. Facing the grand ascent in daylight was threatening enough. In darkness, it would be akin to insanity. He watched the human drop from the bench and meticulously sort through his pack, ensuring everything was in its place before departing. Amir shouldered his bag and turned to Recklin. "Well, Recklin, of the Somnolence Guard," he said, as he placed a hand across his chest and offered a slight bow, attempting to mimic the motion the bird had offered earlier. "It was a pleasure to make your acquaintance." Recklin returned the gesture, "Likewise, Amir the human. May we fly together once again." And with that, Amir offered a nod and headed out the way he came, the path forged upon his entrance now completely blown over by the ravages of the earlier storm. As he watched the human trek back through the snow, he couldn't help but feel a small pang of pity. Had he had wings, he could have simply flown out to greener pastures, but Recklin also held no small amount of admiration for the human. Amir had sojourned here on foot, knowing full well he would have to venture back out. On foot, solely to bring him tidings and festive cheer. Amir's resolve was commendable, if nothing else. As he pulled himself from the bench, Recklin noticed a small, green cylinder propped up against the base of the brazier. It had to have been one of Amir's. He looked up to call to his newfound friend to inform him of what he left behind, but the human had already disappeared over the horizon. He bent down to pick up the forgotten item and felt something odd along the side of it. He shifted the cylinder to find a note taped to it. Scrawled in messy and uncertain but perfectly legible script, for a merry festiving to a new friend, a small gift. Recklin held the cylinder with all the fragility of a freshly laid egg. He knew from his previous outburst that they were hardy things, but this particular one now held a special meaning. Recklin marched his way back to the gate, cylinder in talon, and as he retook his assigned position, he felt just that much warmer, and not only from the soup. Enjoy next Stroy. Well, the snow on my lawn fried my brain into making this absolute gong show. Enjoy? Or don't I have 8 billion metric tons of white bullshit on my driveway I have to deal with anyway? There are precious few sounds one wants to hear on a battlefield, but there are many that one actively does not want to hear. Silence is one such sound. Not a lull in combat silence or a temporary rearming silence. One that is all-encompassing, a complete and unbroken silence. It could only mean one thing: trouble brewing. Perny scampered toward the firing step on his battle line. He pulled himself up on the firing step and took a deep breath. Bravely, he stole a quick glance over the top of the trench and had his worst fears confirmed. Across the field, Ceradan forces were beginning to muster outside of their own fortifications. He cursed to himself he was still new to the line and had no idea what to do. Should he raise a general alarm? Should he just take his rifle and start shooting? Was there some sort of etiquette he was hitherto unaware of in matters of war? Fortunately for Perney, there was a grizzled, scarred veteran napping nearby under a heavy trench coat. Surely he would know what to do. So he swiftly marched up to the veteran and gently prodded him with his foot. "Scaleskins! There are scaleskins out there!" The veteran groggily opened his eyes. Ice bloods. Perney was putting to good use all the slurs he had learned. "They're gathering outside of their trenches." The veteran flicked open his chronometer. "So they are, and we should be too." He threw the coat off and hollered a strange foreign word down the line, and Perney watched as others of his kind set their rifles against the wall of the trench and went over the top. "Ready?" the veteran asked. Perney checked over his rifle. Only a few suns on the line and he was already about to see action. He felt adrenaline course through his veins. He would make himself a hero in short order and bring pride to his family. He was ready. He was excited. All of these thoughts would be quickly washed away as the veteran slapped the gun out of Perney's hand and pointed to it lying in the mud. "You will leave that where it is, you understand?" Perney didn't understand any of what was happening, so in his confused state simply uttered a resigned affirmation. "Good. Don't muck this up." The veteran chided. He mounted the fire step and before taking off turned to Perney. "Chit?" he asked. "What?" "Credit. Chit. Do you have one?" The veteran persisted. No, I don't," Perney responded. "Well, don't expect me to cover you." The veteran scolded Perney, and in the blink of an eye he was over the top and out of Perney's view, and while he fully expected vicious sounds of gunfire to erupt at any moment, he was only met with more of the unsettling silence. This both befuddled and hurt poor Perney. He knew he hadn't been here long enough to forge the bond of brotherhood that most soldiers shared, but to be left without cover simply because he neglected to bring a credit chit to pay for the privilege? Well, that didn't seem right to him at all. Perney hoisted himself out of his trench, fully expecting to be met with the sight of some grand melee between the two forces, but what he saw left him more confused than anything. Both the Cerridon troops and his own were simply standing around in the middle of no man's land. Though the two groups were separated by species and occasionally hurled an insult at one another, the whole scene was unnervingly placid. If he was seeking answers to whatever was going on, he wouldn't find them here, so Perney made, with great caution, towards his own. The crack of a reverse thruster forced his notice, and as he stared to the heavens, he saw a ship on approach. It had to be a ship, for it was a small dark speck on an otherwise unadorned sky, growing larger with every passing moment. But there was only one, so it couldn't be a new belligerent, nor was it a large enough force for reinforcements for either side. This new development caused Perney no small amount of concern. As the shuttle approached and its details became clearer, Perney saw that it was some sort of cargo lander. Though the make and the allegiance were unknown to him, the unwieldy, boxy design left little room for interpretation. It was a rather unremarkable craft, save for one feature. Mounted just above the cockpit, bobbing wildly on an oversized spring, was an exaggerated sculpture of some sort of head. Its mouth was stained red with blood. Teeth bore in an intimidating grimace. Its large, forward-facing predatory eyes were accentuated by a blue war paint. Its head was adorned with a sunburnt explosion of crimson fuzz. This truly was a warrior's visage. As the shuttle touched down, a booming voice over a loudspeaker proclaimed, "Please form an orderly queue, violence, and belligerence will not be tolerated." He watched as various members of the assembly, both the scaleskins and his own, began to form a single line at the side of the craft, and not wanting to be left out of whatever this was, followed suit and fell in with them. There was a sign on the craft that seemed to be a selection of sorts. All the items were listed in common script, but the words seemed to be nonsensical. He honestly didn't know what to make of any of this. The line moved slowly but steadily, and before he knew it, he was at the front, staring up into the face of a creature he had never seen before. It was leaning on its elbows on the sill. Its skin was soft and smooth and had shoulder-length black fur atop its head. It also, much to his chagrin, shared the same binocular eyes as the bobbing nightmare on the externals. It flashed its teeth briefly at Perny, causing him to shudder slightly, before addressing him in an upbeat tone. "Hiya, what can I get you?" Perny spied a large banner hanging behind this strange creature that read, 100% edible and safe for consumption. "Safe for consumption?" he asked suspiciously. "Yup," it replied chipperly. "Gluten and lactose-free, non-GMO, vegan, non-dairy, and tested for all manner of sapients across the galaxy." Back home legally, we couldn't even call this shit ice cream, but considering where we are and what we're doing, we've been given certain, shall we say, liberties. So what'll it be? Again, Perny could read the words that were plastered on the sign that adorned the side of the craft, but they made no sense to him, so he simply pointed at one that at least looked a little bit appetizing. The creature leaned forward out of its window to see what he was pointing at. "Ah, banana split, eh? She's a classic." It then typed something into the strange box in front of it. "That'll be 20.5, please." So that's why the veteran asked for a credit chit. Perny thought. He decided to remove himself from the line before he caught this predator's ire. "Oh, I didn't. I'm sorry." He quickly apologized and began to make his way out, the mystery of this ship forever unrevealed to him. "Hold up a second." The creature waved him back. "This your first time to the front?" Perny swallowed. "Yes." "All right, I'll float you this one. But," the creature pointed a finger at him, "no freebies next time, okay?" Perny just nodded his assent. The creature bore its teeth at him again. "Pickups on your left, there are napkins on the ledge, next." He made his way to the location the creature had indicated, and had no idea what it was he was supposed to be doing, so he chanced a quick look around. He was still trying to digest the scene that was laid out before him. His own kin and Ceradons milling about without a care in the world, as if they were all gathering in a town square for an event, and not supposed to be actively trying to kill one another. He wondered if he had actually been slain in some artillery barrage, or cut down by a sniper unseen, and that this was what passed for the afterlife. Surely none of this could be real. The window behind him gave a faint click that garnered his attention, and as he turned towards it, it suddenly flew open and a small bowl filled with 3 different colored mounds surrounded by pale yellow tubers was shoved into his hands before it quickly shut again. Perny stared hopelessly at the mound that had just been thrust upon him. It looked edible enough, and it smelled, well, quite pleasant, actually. But no eating sticks had been provided, in fact, other than the food itself, and the small bowl, he was given nothing else. He pressed an exploratory claw into the thing, pulling back a small gob of sticky mess. Was he supposed to consume this using only his bare paws, or was he deigned to simply dive into its snout first? If either were the case, the dish would quickly become an unruly mess that would threaten not only his uniform, but also his dignity. "Excuse me? I think I got yours." Perny's ears perked as an alien voice broke his ruminations. A small metal implement being waved in his periphery caught his attention. He turned to the waggling metal and noticed something. The utensil was held in a scaled hand that was attached to a scaled arm that traced all the way up to the scaled form of a Ceradon. He froze for a moment. Here he was within arm's length of his most reviled enemy, and he felt nothing. Not hate, not rage, not fear, not even ambivalence. He felt as though he should be feeling something, anything at this moment, but as her forked tongue furtively flitted in the air between them, her own chilled treat slowly melting onto her hand, she looked surprisingly normal, just another being enjoying a break and a sweet snack. Perny had no idea what to do in this situation. He had never been in it before, so he meekly offered a thank you as he took the contrivance. He looked down at his meal and ruminated on what had just happened. Someone who he was trying to kill, who was trying to kill him, had just given him a tool that would help wrangle the mess that was his food into something more manageable. Perhaps it was some devious ruse. Perhaps she had poisoned it. Perhaps it would explode in his face. Maybe it would disintegrate into dust and infiltrated his bloodstream. He figured it best not to dwell on it, so he shook his head and drove the utensil into the food. The odd pink mound and off-white tube yielded easily enough to the metal implement. As he drew his gathered bite towards his mouth, a familiar voice once again grabbed his attention. "Oh, wait!" The Ceridon stopped him. She slid her oversized pack off her back, placing and setting it onto the muddy ground. Here, it's always much more pleasant to sit while you eat. Perny just stared at her as she settled in on top of her equipment, unsure whether her statement was an invitation or just an observation. "Come on," she laughed as she patted the pack next to her. "I don't bite." Today had seen its share of strangeness, he mused. Surely a little more couldn't hurt. So he obliged. Chapman looked out with pride at the curious crowd of collected critters that were currently enjoying his wares and felt like Ares himself. True, he had caused no destruction this day, but that was beneath him. To smash one's opponents was child's play. To tear down their walls and rend them asunder was a triviality. A god of war, a true god of war, could cease a conflict on a whim, end hostilities with a thought, and he was capable of just that. "I swear, you pull that spoon shit on purpose." Briar's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Yup, I sure do." He turned to look at her. She was leaning up against one of the large freezers, arms crossed, and though she looked the same as she had since the day he picked her up, something felt off. "What's up?" she sighed. "I don't know. It's just when I signed up for this, I wasn't expecting this." Chapman gave her a quizzical look. "Why not? It was all there in black and white." I know, Briar responded. "I thought maybe that was code or something, like this was Deep Eyes only classified. More into the SciFi realm, more black box shit. Instead, I'm actually slinging soft serve to conscripts." "You know this is voluntary, right?" he asked. "If you're not happy, you can transfer out, or you can quit at any time you want." Briar's gaze cast to the floor. "No, I don't. It's just..." She stumbled over herself trying to get the right words out. Chapman gave her a soft smile. "Feels good though, don't it?" Her mood lightened a little. Yeah, it does." She looked towards the fraternizing. "Xenos, it's wild as shit that this actually works. How'd you come up with it anyway?" Chapman was back to being proud of himself. 11 wars and counting. And this?" He gestured broadly around the small shuttle space. "This absolutely unhinged idea came from a half-remembered quote from school. Something about a general fearing the soldiery talking to each other, lest they realized they had no quarrel." His arm flung out to the mingling assembly. "And there's no better way to get folk talking than a Sunday social." Briar groaned and rolled her eyes. Still impressive, though, bringing peace to the galaxy through fucking ice cream. Chapman just grinned and tossed finger guns at her. One scoop at a time. Enjoy next story. So we're screwed? Well, Neb, let's go over the day's events. Pirates have boarded. They've blown away our communications relay, all but slaughtered us, and those of us who survived are stuck in the safe room with no control over the ship. So, a third voice flatly interrupted the condescending tirade. "Specimen's loose, and now the specimen is loose." "Yeah, Neb, I think we're screwed." 4 scientists were all gathered in the ship's safe room. They were all that remained. Pared down from a crew of over 24, they were the only ones that happened to be close, or perhaps lucky, enough to make it to the final bulwark. "But we're in the safe room. They can't get in here, right? We just have to wait them out. Wait for help?" That question belonged to Trest, the youngest and most inexperienced of the lot. She had just earned her apprenticeship and had come to Chem's ship wide-eyed and primed for adventure. But fate occasionally has a cruel sense of humor, so her first foray into the stars would be her last, it seemed. Chem turned to face her. He didn't want to be mean, he really didn't. But the time for pleasantries and comforting lies had passed. The poor lass needed to know what they were facing so that she could make peace with whatever god it was she prayed to. "I'll humor you, Trest," he quipped. "Let's assume that these particular pirates are the special kind of bland that happen to be the only crew that gallivants around without plasma cutters. They've already cut out our comms. They'll simply steal everything of value, everything of no value, anything else not nailed down, and blow our engines. Doesn't matter. If they can't get in, there is a finite amount of oxygen in this room. With no signal or signature, we'll be corpses before anyone even realized we were missing." He could see the tears begin to well in her eyes as the realization washed over her. Perhaps he could have used a little more tact in his hypothetical, but the stress of being about to be consigned to the void was weighing on him. He made a mental note to apologize to her in the afterlife. He was also not trained or ready to deal with a blubbering intern, so he decided to distract himself with more pertinent matters. "What are they up to out there?" he asked Ren, purposely avoiding the torrential sob storm that Trest was about to unleash. "No idea." Ren huffed as he tossed his tablet to the side. "After they broke the locks on the specimen cell, they cut the feed. We're stuck blind and waiting now." Kem's frills rippled. It was one thing to be trapped waiting for death, but to do so with no inkling as to the estimated arrival time of the great winged guardian was a different beast altogether. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, the universe grew tired of its malicious malarkey and decided not to leave the beleaguered scientists in bated anticipation as the muffled roar of a plasma cutter opposite the security door broke through the air. Instinctively, the four moved toward the back wall, away from their impending demise. Not that it mattered much, there really wasn't anywhere to go. The loud thunk of the safety interlock being cut, and the scraping metal on metal of the door being pried open, gave finality to the doomed researchers' situation. 2 Caribbean. Pirates strode through the threshold. Their armored carapace would be more than enough to ward off any feeble assault the biologists could muster. Their mandibles were hungry, clacking at the sight of new, succulent prey. Oh good, Kem thought. They're not just the steal your stuff kind, they're also the kill and eat you kind. And currently, he was very much hoping that they would choose to do it in that order. So it came as a minor relief when one of the insects raised its rifle towards him. It then came as a major shock when the pirate was suddenly relieved of his weapon and one of his arms. The bug didn't even have time to register the missing appendage when the stock of his former rifle became intimately acquainted with his faceplate. He crumpled to the ground in a heap of twitching chitin. His associate turned to face this unexpected intrusion, only to be met with the same weapon slamming down on the top of his head, shattering whatever minuscule cluster of neurons that passed, for a brain it had once had. The quartet had no time to feel any relief. However, as their would-be savoir turned out to be the thing of their nightmares set loose. It was the specimen. It stood over the pirates, skin glistening and breathing heavily, likely examining its most recent handiwork. It took a long, deep breath and dropped the rifle to the floor with a loud clang. This led to Trest letting out a petrified yelp. Bad move. The specimen took notice and looked up. It scanned the petrified group of academics until its predatory eyes landed squarely on Trest. It bore its teeth and raised one of its hands, waving it back and forth violently in some aggressive hunting display. Ren and Neb took measured steps to distance themselves from poor Trest, who appeared to have, for some reason or another, attracted the targeted ire of the bloodthirsty beast. Kem, however, was made of slightly stiffer stuff and took his role as expeditionary leader rather seriously, so he stepped between the beast and the quivering intern. After the violent display the specimen just put on, he seriously doubted that. This gesture would make any difference, but at least he could make a good show of it, and maybe provide the girl a few more moments of precious life. The specimen recoiled slightly and looked almost offended. It shook its head back and forth a few times. "Friend," it said, as it pointed a single digit toward a violently trembling Trest. "Friend, sing me." The 3 others turned toward her, looking for clarification on the bizarre statement. Her frills deepened with embarrassment. She had been, admittedly, more than a little unsettled to be in such close proximity to what could best be described as a walking war machine, so while running her experiments she had taken to singing hatchery, rhymes softly to herself to soothe her nerves. The bizarre creature had mistakenly thought she was singing to it, though given her current precarious predicament, she thought better of correcting it. Neb would be the voice to ask the question that now lingered in everyone's mind. Wait, how the hell does it know how to mimic our speech? Where could it possibly have learned that? The specimen, it seemed, had anticipated that question, or at the very least one in the same vein. It cocked its head to one side. See no, same not same. Its face seemed to condense. It tried to clarify. Learn speaks, learn space. Great. Ren moaned. All it knows is gibberish. No, I don't think that it's gibberish, Neb retorted. I think it's trying to communicate. I'm fairly certain we can decipher what it's trying to say if we look at it scientifically. We have to work backwards, extrapolate from incomplete data. He began pacing as he was wont to do when faced with a particularly vexing quandary. Learn space is fairly obvious. It's likely analogous to one of our schools or academies. Learn speaks is more difficult, but seeing as it was able to use the singular for trest singing and use the plurality for speaking, combined with the speed at which it picked up words from our language, we can reasonably surmise that it wasn't actually learning to speak per se, but likely was learning languages, or at least something adjacent like linguistics. Same not same is a different challenge. His pacing became more erratic as he fell deeper into the linguistic mystery. Likely something that is close, but not the exact same. His eyes lit up as the pieces began to fall into place. Something similar. See-no is a little more difficult. I think that, in conjunction with similar, we can assume it to be comprehension, or at the very least understanding. Neb's tail smacked the floor with insight. Recognition. So if we combine all the data points, of course factoring in interpretation, errors, I think it's trying to say that it has pattern recognition and picked up our language because it was studying them at an academy. Neb's pride at deciphering the solution quickly gave way to abject terror. Wait, if it has pattern recognition and was studying at an institution, that would mean no. He pointed a shaky phalange at the specimen. It's a sentient. We've been running experiments on a sentient. Neb collapsed to the floor, embracing himself in a fetal position at the revelation, incoherently rambling about moral failings. The specimen looked slightly upset at Neb's existential crisis. Hurt, it said as it pointed to the whimpering. Mess. No. Not hurt. Stupid. Kem hoped his simplified answer would suffice, but the empty stare he received indicated the opposite. Though it couldn't fully understand Kem, its ability to perceive and react to change did lend weight to Neb's theory. This gave him an idea to truly test the sentient capabilities of the specimen. He stared down the one working computational station in the room. Showtime. Kem made a gesture to the specimen to follow as he walked over to the console, and much to his surprise, it dutifully followed him without any hesitation. He booted up the translation matrix input program. The screen flickered and a crude picture of a dwelling appeared. Speak, Kem said. The specimen narrowed its eyes at the image before it turned to Kem and lifted its shoulders briefly. Kem scoffed. You, speak. It stared back at the picture for a moment before bringing up one of its hands, moving it in a way that created an odd clicking sound. It then growled something in a strange dialect that he assumed was its mother tongue. The image changed, and the specimen belted out something else. Shit, it's figured it out. Looks like Neb was right, Kem reasoned. As the specimen continued to work through the images brought up on the console, he made his way over to Neb, plucking the earpiece from his incapacitated colleague. He made his way back to the specimen as it was finishing up with the program and let out a short cough to grab its attention. He offered up the earpiece and pointed to the side of his own head. The specimen took it and moved its head up and down. With some difficulty, it managed to seat the piece on its alien anatomy. Hello? Is this better? Is it easier to understand? Kem asked the specimen, its face contorted briefly. Yes. Better. Thank you. It won't be perfect. Syntax, idioms, and grammar may become distorted or incorrect, but it's a logarithmic learning algorithm. The more we speak, the clearer it will become. You understand? The specimen nodded its head. Yeah, I get it. What I don't get, however, Kem flinched at the sudden shift in tone from the specimen, is why we didn't just do this off the hop. It would have made everything easier. This decidedly posed a problem for Kem. He could lie and risk pissing the specimen off, or he could tell the truth and risk pissing the specimen off, as science is the pursuit of truth into his core. He was a scientist. He went with the latter. We didn't know you were a sentient, he said quietly. What? The specimen seemed incensed. When you scooped me up, did you not notice the cities, the signals, the satellites? Like, I get it. It's not Star Trek level space shit, but surely that level of civilization should have given it away. There, Was a strange silence as no one apparently wanted to answer the question. The specimen once again regarded the others in the room, all of whom had suddenly, simultaneously, found the floor incredibly fascinating. Kem sighed. The next answer may be more difficult. But seeing as thus far the specimen had been fairly amenable, he pressed on. You were purchased. What? Why? Kem's tail flicked non-committally. Because grant funding has been sparse recently. To get any appreciable amount, a shattering discovery needs to be made. One of my crewmen said he knew a guy, as it were, and it turns out his contact was good. So we pooled what little funding we got, along with some of our own savings, and purchased you, stasis pod and all. You were billed as an exotic, unknown, apex ambush predator. Something that's relatively difficult to get one's hands on. The specimen stared blankly at him for a few moments before bursting out in a fit of laughter. Buddy, you got railroaded. I may be one of those things, but if that's what you were paying for, you got scammed. How's that? Asked Kem. For starters, I ain't Apex. I could rattle off a dozen animals that would beat my ass, half of them prey off the top of my head. The specimen explained. Plus, not an ambush predator. There's persistence hunting in my lineage, sure, but not something we've done for a long time. All in all, we're pretty bland. I think the unknown thing is the only category I qualify for. Persistence predation? That would explain why our experimentation was going awry. We were chasing the wrong path. Kem froze in the excitement he had accidentally, explicitly, revealed their ethically dubious enterprise. He looked back to the specimen who seemed to have not reacted to the information. I do apologize. Had we known about your sentience, we wouldn't have performed such invasive procedures. The specimen let out a strange snort. You call those invasive? Hell, I've had worse blood draws at the lab. I do wonder, though, what was your end goal with all this? Surely some blood draws and alien X-rays weren't it. Kem gulped. This was the question he was dreading. We were going to make you as comfortable as possible, then we would have euthanized you and performed a dissection. All painless, I swear, and it was for science. I can only hope you aren't terribly cross with us. As commander of this operation, I take full responsibility and can only request you direct your rage toward me. The specimen let out a heavy breath. Oof, I'm glad it didn't come to that. Kem glanced to the bodies of the still twitching pirates. As am I. Again, I offer my deepest apologies. Please do not harbor resentment for my crew. The specimen waved a hand dismissively at him. Look, other than the weird mix-up where you assumed I wasn't a person, this whole trip has been a ride on Easy Street. So no, I'm not angry. This made very little sense to Kem. If he had been kidnapped, mistaken for a beast, and had experiments performed on him, he would be more than a little miffed. So for the nth time today, he decided to be bold. I'll risk overstepping, but why aren't you at least a little mad? Because this is so objectively absurd. If you had told me 6 months ago that I'd be bouncing around a starship, waxing alien cockroaches to save a bunch of walking Geico ads that thought that I had the cognitive capacity of an ant and had plans to vivisect me, I would have asked if you were smoking crack cocaine, but the specimen gesticulated widely around the room. Here we are! The specimen thought for a moment. Wait, you said stasis pod and all? Hell, it may be longer than 6 months, but my point stands. All of this, it's insane. Insane as it all may be, Kem said as he wandered back to the console. Now that we've cleared up this, unfortunate misunderstanding, I think it would be beneficial for all parties to get you back where you came from. He pulled up a holographic galactic map and turned back to the specimen, whose demeanor had once again shifted. This time it emanated an air of disappointment. Something the matter? He asked. Well, it's just that where I'm from, this would literally be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It paused. I was kind of hoping you'd allow me to stay, even if for just a while. A grand space adventure sounds pretty neat. It pointed to the map. Sides, that might as well be written in hieroglyphs. Don't know if I could find Earth even if I was chomping at the bit for it. Kem thought on this. There was a lot of potential to having such a creature around. If he could somehow convince it to allow experimentation to continue, even at a reduced rate, the data provided could be invaluable, not to mention recrewing, would be infinitely easier with the level of protection the specimen could offer. He prepared himself to negotiate with all the tact that he could muster, but the specimen seemed ready to do his job for him. "I ain't no freeloader. I'd be willing to pull my weight. Hell, I'd be willing to let you keep running your experiments, with the euthanasia and dissection bits off the table, of course." It offered. Kem was shocked. Not only was the specimen ready to work to earn its stay, but it had also willingly offered its body for science. He was practically salivating it. The academic prestige, not to mention the grant funding that would roll his way. There was no chance he was going to let this opportunity slip through his webbed fingers. "No cutting you open. Seems a reasonable compromise." He hissed with amusement. "I'm sure we can make reasonable accommodations to facilitate your stay if you're certain. Though if you do find yourself lacking anything, once we crew up, feel free to ask. I think I'm all right. I'm a creature of few earthly comforts. All I need is the clothes on my back and..." The specimen stopped mid-sentence, glancing down briefly at its own form. Its face twisted into one of abject horror, realizing, seemingly for the first time, that in this entire escapade, it had been naked as the day it was hatched. "Actually, there is one thing," it added quickly. "You guys got a towel? Bit chilly in here. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think."